Hi, I'm Chase, and in this video I'm going to be making a basket weave cutting board out of walnut, maple, and purple heart. Welcome to my shop. So I've built end-grain boards before, but this one's going to be a bit different because in order to achieve the basket weave look I'm going for, I'm going to have to assemble all the pieces in one glue up. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do it yet, but it's going to be a bit of an experiment, and I'll try to share some lessons that I learned along the way. So this design isn't 100% original, but what I find interesting about it is the size of the purple heart squares that I'm going to cut. They're only 3/16 of an inch and will probably require some fine-ish woodworking, which I'm excited to try to pull off. I'll start by ripping my material down on the bandsaw. I ordered some 1/4 inch by 18 inch maple strips just to save a few steps of milling my own, but I was pretty disappointed in the color consistency, so next time I'll just make some. The walnut came in at 1 3/4 inch squares, and I'm just resawing them in half to 7/8 of an inch. And while I'm at it, I'll cut some 1/4 inch strips of purple heart. And my wife came to check if I still had all my fingers. Once everything was ripped down to their rough dimensions, it was time to take it down to the critical dimensions. So the walnut got planed down to 3/4 of an inch, and the purple heart to 3/16 of an inch. There was a good bit of tear out on the purple heart, and I already know that they're going to get ripped to shreds whenever I pass the strips through the planer. But I press on anyway, and I put tape on one side of the purple heart just so I know what side has already been dimensioned. It just takes the guesswork out of everything, and I don't really have to think about it. And just as I thought, it's spitting out splinters, so all I can do is collect what I can. This would be a better job for a drum sander, but I don't have one. And this is what we're left with, so just cut them down to 1.5 inch pieces and put them aside. I did have to make some more off camera, but I found a piece of straighter grain purple heart and it came out a little bit better. And with all of those steps done, it was time for the glue up. So just using my finger to spread some glue. I really should get a silicone brush, but I started with these smaller strips just so I didn't have the glue start to set up on me. And I'm just pushing everything down flat to the clamps to get that bottom side as flat as possible. And with the larger ones glued up, I just added them to the clamps. Same process of making sure everything's straight, flat, push down tight, and added more clamps to tighten everything up really good. So I'm just going to go through and verify that every piece is hitting the 1.25" critical dimension. And you can see the bottom isn't perfectly flat, but it should be close enough. I think I have enough material there to yield 1 5/8". So I'm happy with that. The next day I'll pass these on the joiner to get that bottom face perfectly flat and square to the adjacent face. And again, I'm just verifying with my combination square that everything is indeed square and there's no light passing under the ruler, which would indicate to me that I haven't taken enough material off. And once that's done, pass them through the planer to hit that critical dimension of 1 5/8". And just another reason I wasn't very happy with the maple strips, there was a lot of pinhole defects, which I'm not too concerned about because they'll end up in the center of the board, but it could have been a problem if I was building something else. Now, since I'm shooting for 1 1/4" thickness on my board, I'll cut these to 1.5" just to give me some material for flattening and sanding. I could have done that operation on the miter saw or the table saw. I just find the bandsaw is a little bit faster and safer, but the only downside is it leaves these little burrs on the wood, so here I'm just gonna sand every edge, and it didn't take too long, maybe 5 minutes, but that's what we're left with. And here's a little preview of what we're going for. I clamped them up like this just to make sure everything was looking right as far as the dimensions. But Purple Heart in the center and the walnut and maple at 90 degrees to each other. Here's where I might get a little unconventional because I have a plywood surfaced table and I can just screw directly into it, which is nice because I don't have to baby it. So I just took a piece of cardboard and screwed it underneath these 2x4 blocks and made sure they were square. Because my son drew on this cardboard, I think technically that means he helped build this project. I will admit though that the cardboard was a mistake. It did prevent the board from gluing itself to the table, but it just wasn't a solid enough surface to prevent cupping when the clamps were applied. I did switch to using wax paper in the final glue up. At this point, I'm realizing that these Purple Heart pieces are not consistent enough in thickness to avoid gaps throughout the board, probably because of the planer, but it just doesn't look good. You can't see it here because I didn't focus the camera, but just trust me. So this was my solution to try to thin these pieces down a bit. And you can see, again, I'm just making a jig directly on the table. Just making sure I set those nails down a little deeper so my plane doesn't catch them. And I did that 70 times. Unfortunately, even after all of that, there were still a few gaps. And I thought maybe I can overcome those by doing a smaller glue up. And once the glue was applied, maybe everything would slide into place whenever I added the clamps. I also thought it would be better to do it this way because I wouldn't have to fight the time um, of the glue setting on me, and I could just glue up the smaller boards into a bigger board. Once the clamps are applied, I threw some screws into the table to pull everything flat in hopes that it would prevent cupping. But after it was said and done, it didn't work that great, so I didn't do the rest of the board this way. And I'm not sure if other woodworkers do this or if it would even be recommended, but I clean up the glue with a wet rag, but it also serves the purpose of expanding the end grain a bit and sealing off any remaining gaps. I haven't had issues with it in the past, so I keep doing it. And the rest of the glue up went exactly how I expected it to. It was stressful to try to race the clock to avoid the glue setting on me and getting the proper clamping pressure. So I didn't film it, but here it is.
It's starting to take a picture.
And my little supervisor came to make sure I actually was recording this time. Now, because my bench is not level and possibly has a twist in it, I have to use a series of blocks and shims in order to get a level plane for the router sled to glide on. I also tried to level the board underneath it as best as possible. It did have a 3/16 of an inch or so cup, which is not too bad. I think this is a 2.5 inch bit from Amazon. It's a cheap one for a CNC, which obviously would be a better tool for this operation, but this works well enough. You just have to take your time. And you can see there's a little bit of flex in my router sled, but it's nothing that some sanding won't remove. And here it is after the flattening. Came out pretty good, I think. Just a couple of burn marks. But all in all, not too bad. And this is why I gave myself an 1.5 inch material, because with the cupping that occurred, I was able to just get right over 1.25 inches. And after sanding, hopefully it's dead on. Because the board was glued up against those flat 2x4s on the bench, I trust that edge to be up against the fence to get a square edge for the rest of the sides. My saw does look like it wobbles a lot because of the stand it's on, but it does cut square. And I just break down some oversized walnut pieces to build as the border. It did take a lot of back and forth to the saw to dial in these miters. And this is just a homemade band clamp, but just go buy one because it'll work a lot better. And I'm just marking the edge pieces so I can remove the extra material before I glue everything up. I start with 60 grit to cut down any imperfections and burn marks from the flattening process. That router bit will kind of tear the end grain, so gotta sand it down a good bit. And then I'll lay an old pillowcase down to not scratch the surface I've already done. One of the miters didn't come out perfect, so I mixed up some glue and sawdust from sanding and filled it in. I spent about an hour with this sanding block and some 80 grit sandpaper to flatten it even more, and it worked. It just took a lot of effort. And before I start the finish sanding process, I'm going to break the corners with an 1/8 inch round over bit, just so any marks from the router will get sanded out. I'm not showing all the sanding because it's boring and you probably don't want to see it. So I did work my way up through the grits and landed on 400. I chose to finish the board with a hard wax oil rather than soaking it with mineral oil, mainly because I didn't want the end grain to expand and pop the miters of the edge grain. I know most woodworkers would not advise to mix edge grain and end grain, but it looks good, doesn't it? I had to add some CA glue to that last foot. I must have hit a soft spot in the walnut and it just stripped out. I started this project on November 14th and I'm finishing it on December 23rd at 8 p.m., just in time for Christmas. So I hope you like it. I enjoyed making it. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.